Hey there, good morning. Welcome to the Jeep Solid Garage. So today we're going to dig into this stroker build a little bit more. We're going to disassemble the bottom half. We're going to take the timing chain cover, look at the bearings, all that good stuff. I believe we have a spun bearing on that. Are we going to be able to find it? I don't know. We're going to see what that looks like. And I just love mornings like this. I got the garage door open. It's a sunny day, 80 degrees out. Got my coffee. It's just a nice day. All right, let's take a look under here, see what we got. Set the coffee down for a second. Oh, it just gets hung up on everything. And this build is sponsored by Engine Tech. I'm going to be using their rebuild kit on this. I'm thinking of going 60 thousandths over, 258 crank, a few other things. But first let's tear into the timing chain. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take the nut off the vibration damper there. And we're going to have to brace the crank on the back side here. Just have to brace the back side of the crank with a screwdriver somehow. On this vibration damper, you can't use a standard puller like this because you'll actually bend it. This one probably needs to be replaced anyways, but you'll bend this and ruin it. You got to use this bolt style puller here. And this would be exactly why I make a little cardboard cutout, draw a picture of the timing chain cover, keep track of all my nuts and bolts, because sometimes you throw them on the ground and sometimes they're different sizes. When it comes time for reassembly, that just makes it so much easier. And with that, the timing chain cover should come off. And a few key pieces to keep track of. So right here we've got a little pin. There's a pin in here and a spring. We'll take that out. The pin comes out just easy. We'll get to that though. You got your little oil slinger on here. Just don't lose these little parts. And then you've got this little guide down here in the timing chain cover. Little plastic piece. Sometimes this guy tries to fall out on you. The chain's got a little bit of play in it, but we're going to be replacing all of that with our Engine Tech parts. And on closer inspection of this guy, so our little plastic piece here, it's obviously worn, but the chain was even dragging on the inside of the aluminum here, the timing chain cover. Let's get our little pin and spring out of there. And these just put a little bit of pressure onto the camshaft just to kind of keep it in place. And our oil slinger here, notice the way it goes on. So it's cupped out like that. You know what I was thinking before I take the sprockets and chain off here? Let me show you guys how the timing is set on these. Let me show you the timing marks real quick. Gotta get them lined up first though. So there's a little mark on the crankshaft right there, on the crankshaft sprocket and camshaft sprocket. So you just get those two lined up. That is how the timing is set. Now let's pull this guy off. The camshaft or crankshaft sprocket's a bit fused. Oh, how funny, the whole cam is coming out with it. Clean my hands off so I can pick up the camera and show you guys. And it doesn't really matter, but yeah, see, the whole camshaft is coming out with a sprocket. It wasn't my intention. And we're going to be rebuilding this, so it doesn't really matter. I wanted to get this off separate. There we go, come on. There we go. All right, let's flip this guy over so you guys can have a better look at the crank and camshaft there. We'll pull those guys out and take a look at the bearings. And as the camshaft was coming out already, we'll go ahead and just take it out the rest of the way. Not too worried about the bearings because we're going to be replacing everything. Normally you'd be a lot gentler, so you don't want to scratch up the bearings. Okay, we've got the bottom end here. Let's go ahead and remove the oil pump here real quick. It is just a couple bolts. These two guys right here. Okay, next we're going to remove the rod caps here, the bearing cap ends. Now our bearing caps on our crankshaft, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bearing caps on the crank, and those guys are all labeled real nice. There you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But the bearing caps on the rods, these are not labeled, but I want to get them back in the same spot. So we're going to put a little mark on them with a punch. Even though I'm not going to be using these same rods, I do, just in case, I want to keep them in order. And I'm going to mark it at the bottom. That guy's cap number 1, so 1 little dot. Two dots on that guy. So there we go, we got all the caps marked so we can get them back in the same spot if we need to. Let's take these guys off one at a time and check out the bearings. Bearings right here. Oh yeah, that is really worn. So if you guys see this bearing, it's worn all the way down to the brass underneath. It's supposed to be just all that nice shiny silver. I've got my gloves on, but even through the gloves I can feel it's a little rough. And the journal on the crank there, if you can see how it's all kind of marked up as well. It's supposed to be all shiny smooth, but yeah, it's worn as well. So good thing we are doing a rebuild on this and getting a new crank. So all those journals will be new, the rods will be new. This will be a nice build. Alright, let's turn this over, get the piston lined up so that we can drop it out and take a look at it. And normally you would cover up these threads so you don't score the inside of the cylinders you're dropping this down. But because we're rebuilding, gonna have it honed and bored and all that, I'm not worried about it. And there we go. The piston. Actually doesn't look in that bad a shape. A lot of carbon on the top, as we saw, that's to be expected. Now the bearing, this is interesting. Wow, look at that. All of that scoring that happened, just worn down to that brass underneath, that is just crazy. Some serious wear that happened there. That is super interesting. I'm real curious to see what the rest of these bearings are going to look like. So let's bust these out real quick and take a look at them. So clearly the rod here on piston number 1, this is the one that has like the deep scoring and just it's in the worst shape. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These others aren't that bad. As you can see, they don't have any of that real deep scoring. There's a little bit of dirt and debris on there just from removing it. But overall, yeah, not super bad except for cylinder number 1 there. Wow, that is impressive. And same things on the cap here. We start at 6 on the bottom there and then get up to number 1 up here. You can really see some deep scoring on that. And another interesting thing, so piston 1 with our real bad bearing here, it has been replaced at some point. So here's piston 1, here's piston 2, and you can see there's just a very slight difference in them. There's just a very slight difference in the mold. See how this one has a little dip right there where the pin goes through. This one does not have that. Can't really see any difference on the top. They're both D-shaped pistons, but yeah, just a very subtle difference. So piston number 1 was replaced at some point. I would love to know the history on this engine. That's really interesting. All the others are exactly the same, but yeah, piston number 1 was replaced, and this is the one with the bad bearing. So I wonder if when they replaced it, they didn't get something quite right. They didn't get it torqued quite right. The clearance wasn't right. Something wasn't right, and it just wore it out. So let's take the crank out real quick, look at those bearings, and see what kind of shape they're in. Now, same thing with the crank. I'm going to keep all the bolts in order, all the bearing caps in order, so we know exactly where everything comes out. All right, let's have a little look-see here. And actually, the bearings here, like the journals, they don't look that bad. Here's obviously the journal on rod number 1, and it's a little rough. But the journals on the crank are actually still pretty smooth. They don't look that bad at all. And the bearing caps and the bearings here, same thing. I mean, little normal wear, but nothing horrific like that bearing on that one on rod number 1. Alrighty, let's lift this crank out of here. Oh, and there we go. So be sure to check out my next video right up there in the corner. And I'm gonna go on Ninja Tech's website and order out my new crank, master rebuild kit, bearings, all that. Oh, I gotta find somewhere to set this down. It's getting heavy.